Tehran and Washington, D.C., and that is where we will begin with Rosalind Jordan. Rosalind, we heard a little bit from Secretary of State Marco Rubio today. It's been a visible day for the Trump administration, including for the president. What else did they all have to say?
The U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio also refused to get into the details of what is happening in the indirect negotiations between the U.S. and Iran. Pakistan is acting as the interlocutor for these indirect talks because Rubio said that he doesn't want to, one, have the negotiations take place publicly, and that is understandable under traditional diplomatic norms. You don't want to put out some of the more sensitive or controversial points of contention into the public sphere because that might possibly erode one side's negotiating advantage or perhaps harden the other positions in the negotiation. So that is understandable. We also did hear from the U.S. President Donald Trump, who spoke at a Saudi investment forum in Miami on Friday evening. Here's more of what he had to say about the ongoing conduct of the war against Iran.
We're crushing Iran's currently as we speak. I just looked. We had another big day. We hit them. They don't know what's happening. Remember this. They lied about 3 days ago. I said, yeah, we're negotiating with Israel. We are not negotiating. They're being hit so hard. Anybody would be negotiating. They are negotiating. They're begging to make a deal. They're begging to make a deal. Turned out I was right. They were negotiating, which they admitted 2 days later. And in order to make up for their misstatement, they said, we're going to send you 8 ships of oil. And the following day I saw, this is 2 days ago, I saw on one of the networks, very strange, there were 8 ships of oil coming out of Iran. And then they actually said, we're going to add an extra 2. And they added an extra 2.
And interestingly, Rosalind, in that speech, the president also suggested that Saudi Arabia and Israel should normalize their relations when this war is over. What did he mean by that, and how significant would that be?
If the Saudis and the Israelis normalized relations and opened embassies in both countries, that would be a huge win for the Trump administration, among others, because in the first term of Donald Trump, he initiated something called the Abraham Accords, trying to negotiate peace treaties between Israel and more of its Arab neighbors. Up until the Abraham Accords were initiated, Israel only had negotiated relations with Jordan and with Egypt. But the only roadblock, and it's a significant roadblock for the Saudis, is the status of the Palestinian people. The Saudis believe that the Palestinians deserve to have their own country, and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said he will do everything possible to prevent that from happening. Unless that can be resolved, there won't be diplomatic ties between the Saudis and the Israelis, because for the Saudis, a Palestinian state is a red line issue.
Rosalind Jordan, live for us in Washington, D.C. As always, thank you, Rosalind. Let's go to Mohammed Val now, who joins us live from Tehran. So, Mohammed, we were seeing these attacks earlier today on Iran. Iran is saying that it will retaliate for those attacks. Do we know what those strikes might target?
Well, Iranians have always said that they deal with this type of situation through retaliation in kind. So any type of facility or any type of target that is struck by the Americans or the Israelis in Iran, they threaten, and also they follow those threats with action. They retaliate against similar targets or similar facilities on the other side, either in Israel or in the Gulf region. The IRGC today issued a very strong statement in this respect, saying that following the attacks on 3 nuclear facilities in the country and also 2 steel production companies, then the other side should brace for similar attacks in the next few hours. And basically, as I said, usually it happens in Israel or in the region, because they think that while Israel is a direct partner in this war, the countries in the region that have allowed, according to the Iranian narrative, have allowed the Americans to use their territory, their land, their water and air to be used for attacks against Iran, then Iran has the right to retaliate in kind and to strike against those countries, particularly at facilities that are similar to the ones that have been struck in Iran. So there were warnings to people living around those facilities, not in several countries, to stay away from them. So that's the policy and that's the approach Iran is following since the beginning of the war. And Iran believes that the Americans and the Israelis, while talking about peace, particularly the Americans, the Israelis in particular are using force and destruction and attacks to mar any prospect for peace in this war or an end to it. I consider also that the Americans are trying to force the Iranians to negotiate under coercion and to give up on their demands. But Iranians have some very tough recommendations or demands or conditions, terms, before they accept any kind of ceasefire. 5 major demands, including sovereignty in the future over the Strait of Hormuz, including reparation for the destruction that has been visited on Iran on a wide scale, and also the linking of the other branch or other affiliates of Iran in the region have to be included in any peace deal, and non-repetition of aggression against Iran. These are some of the major points that they stick to here, and they said there is no way they are going to give up on these points. While the Americans have advanced or have submitted 15 points, the Iranians have not yet responded to those points, and they don't seem to be impressed by most of them. The likelihood that they are going to accept them is very low, and this is an indication of the possibility that this war is going to drag on, because the two sides are betting on military might to force their goals or to reach their goals. While the Americans are building up their troops around the region, the Iranians say they still have a lot of surprises for the enemy. They are still using very heavy weapons, very heavy missiles against Israel and other targets in the region. They are still sending waves of drones every few hours along with those missiles. And they have a lot of strong rhetoric also at the same time about the fact that they are not about to run out of those weapons or of the possibility or the capabilities to defend the country. And that's what the Americans and the Israelis should brace to, should wait for punishment in kind whenever they wage a new strikes or new aggression against Iran.
All right, Mohammed Val reporting live for us in Tehran. Mohammed, thank you. Now let's bring in Rob McBride, who is following developments in Israel from the Jordanian capital, Amman. Rob, we know that in retaliation for those strikes on Iran, Israel has been dealing with a series of incoming attacks. What can you tell us about what's been happening there?
That's right. Probably the most serious recent attack happened late Friday, early hours of Saturday morning here, local time. This was an incoming missile salvo that was seen as a direct response, retaliation for what was increased strikes by Israel's military on targets throughout Iran earlier on Friday. The target for this salvo was Tel Aviv and towns and cities around it and to the east of it. At least one of the incoming missiles was one of these cluster warheads spreading smaller bomblets over a wide area. So the actual area of impact was quite widespread. There were a number of impacts being reported. In fact, one of them impacted in a street in the middle of Tel Aviv that is normally a busy commercial and shopping street. So there was it was fairly widespread, with one person being killed, several others being injured with differing degrees of injury. And as often happens, this was combined with an attack by Hezbollah from the north, firing rockets across the border into communities in northern Israel along the border. Sirens were raised at a number of places. Incoming rockets were received. Now, it's because of this threat of Hezbollah from the north that Israel partly justifies its growing operation, moving more and more troops and resources into southern Lebanon, driving Hezbollah back, forming this buffer zone. And the army chief, Eyal Zamir, actually visited earlier Friday the troops who are conducting this operation. In recent times, the Emir has been quite critical of Israel's government for not providing enough troops for this operation and all the other commitments that Israel's military is involved in at the moment. But on this particular trip, when it came to dealing with the troops, he was typically upbeat, chest thumping, telling his troops that they were at an historic crossroads, telling them that fundamentally they were changing what he said was the security situation from Tehran to Beirut.
All right, Rob McBride reporting live for us in Amman, Jordan. Rob, thank you. In Lebanon, Israel has issued more forced evacuation orders. The Israeli military has instructed residents in towns and villages in the southern region to evacuate, directing them to relocate north of the Zahrani River. This means that the evacuation area now goes beyond the Litani River and all the way to the Zahrani River. The Norwegian Refugee Council says these orders cover over 1,400 square kilometers, which accounts for about 14% of Lebanon's total territory. And as Israel's attacks on Lebanon increase, so does the death toll. The Lebanese Health Ministry says Israeli strikes killed 4 people and injured 8 in the southern town of Saksakieh. Israeli forces also carried out strikes in the nearby town of Sarafand. Beirut's southern suburbs have also been struck again in the early hours of Saturday. The Israeli military says it was targeting Hezbollah. Thousands of people have fled the capital because of the bombing. Health officials say that 26 people were killed and 86 others were injured in Israeli attacks over the past 24 hours. Heidi Pett is live for us in Beirut now. Heidi, what can you tell us about these latest strikes that have been taking place?
So just a few minutes ago, we had another heavy airstrike on Beirut's southern suburbs. That's the area known as Dahia. This one specifically in the suburb of Haret Hreik. And the pictures that we are able to get through that are beginning to circulate on some local channels indicate a severe amount of damage. We don't yet have any confirmed information about casualties in that area, but the southern suburbs have been the subject of a renewed forced evacuation order that was issued earlier this evening by the Israeli military. They've been doing that on a sort of rolling basis for nearly 4 weeks now. When the war first broke out, that was one of the first areas to be given these orders. And as you were just saying, it's not just Beirut's southern suburbs. It is indeed a very large swathe of Lebanon. Nearly 14% is now covered by these forced evacuation orders. It means that more than 1 million people have left their homes. Many of them are in shelters. They're trying to stay with family and friends, but there are still many people across Lebanon with nowhere else to go. Some still sleeping on the streets of the capital here in Beirut. But across the country, down in the south, it has once again been the major focus of Israeli air activity. There's been a number of airstrikes across the south, and you were just giving those numbers on the latest death toll. It's now 1,142 is the official count. But even in the time since the Lebanese Ministry of Health issued that number, it does them every 24 hours, normally in the afternoon, they've confirmed a number of additional deaths, including 3 children who were killed in a further airstrike in the south. Since they even confirmed that number, bringing the number of children killed so far in this war to 125 across Lebanon. The context here is this broadening Israeli ground invasion in the south of Lebanon. We have seen the Israeli chief of staff of the army, in fact, posing for photographs inside Lebanese territory earlier this afternoon, and there's been ongoing clashes. We've seen Israeli troops operating in and around the town of Hiam, which is a strategic town in the eastern part of the border region. The Israelis have been seeking to take control of that town for a number of weeks now, and the reason that they're so interested in it is that it's a hilltop town that if they manage to take it will put them well on the way to cutting off the Bekaa Valley from southern Lebanon. And those are the 2 areas where Hezbollah has typically operated from a position of strength. And this is part of this ongoing operation the Israelis are engaged in, trying to push and create this buffer zone, or what they're calling a security zone, all the way up to the Litani River. And in the latest statements we've had from them, they've said that actually Hezbollah has now been firing the majority of their rockets from north of the Litani River. And so it's unclear, what their real aims are, where this will finish. But the deep fear of many here in Lebanon is that this will represent another Israeli invasion and potentially another long-term Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon. Now, in terms of the response that we've seen from Hezbollah in the last 24 hours, they have claimed a large number of operations once again, 82, and including very significantly earlier this afternoon, they claimed that they fired a surface-to-air missile at an Israeli jet that was flying over the capital.
Heidi Pett reporting live for us from Beirut. Thank you, Heidi. Oil prices passed the $114 mark as markets react to fears of a long disruption in supply from the Middle East. Shipments through the Strait of Hormuz remain severely limited. The International Energy Agency says the current supply shock is more severe than the 1970s oil crisis and the Russia-Ukraine gas disruption combined. Some of Iran's attacks on refineries across the Gulf will take months or years to repair. Beyond surging oil prices and plunging stock markets, a quieter but consequential crisis is unfolding. That's the disruption of global fertilizer supplies. With traffic through the Strait of Hormuz blocked, a critical route for fertilizer exports has been choked. The United Nations says it's setting up a task force to help avoid a looming disaster.
This new mechanism for the Strait of Hormuz aims to facilitate fertilizer trade, including the movements of raw materials. The mechanism's operationalization will be done in close consultation with relevant member states, with full respect for national sovereignty and established international legal frameworks. If successful, it would also create a confidence among member states on the diplomatic approach to the conflict and constitute a valuable step towards a wider political settlement. As part of his broader peacemaking mandate, the Secretary General's personal envoy, Jean Arnaud, will lead the political engagement with relevant member states, supported by members of the task force.